I love Jesus. As I look back, I wonder if I loved Him before, the way I feel now, and what's going on in my life. I have a feeling I loved ministry more than I loved Him. I have a feeling I loved theology more than I loved Him. I have a feeling I loved my own ideas more than I loved Him. I want to love Him. I want to love Him more than my theology. I want to love the person. I want to embrace Him. I don't want an idea, I want Him. I don't want a style of life. I want to embrace His nature until He lives Himself through me. I've been saturating this week in the idea of the cross, and in Matthew chapter 12, verse 14, which is where we're going to go, the whole death of Jesus and all that's contained within that, it's just overwhelming. And as you look into Matthew chapter 12, verse 14, you begin to find that the cross is there as well. In fact, as you move into it, it's the preliminary to the cross. Because they're going out in verse 14, the Pharisees have gone out and they're plotting against Him, how they might destroy Him. And what you discover is that the cross, as we've talked before, is not just an event. It is an event. There was an historical event called the cross. There isn't any question about that. But you begin to discover that what produced the event and what really matters is not the event, although it does matter. But what caused that event was the attitude and the nature. So that the cross has gone on a long time before it ever got down to putting a nail in His hand. Those were the consequences of the attitude and the nature that was roaring through the lives of people. So in this passage, the cross event doesn't happen until chapter 26 and 27. And this is chapter 12, but as you get into it, you see that the cross is happening here because they've already crucified Him in their minds and their hearts. They're just finding a way to bring it into physical reality. So you may say, well, I wasn't there 2,000 years ago, but I propose to you that the very attitude they had could be the attitude that you have, and that attitude that you have had or have literally is what's nailed Him. And while you've never brought it about in a physical sense, the attitude, the nature, the way you've responded to Him, the very pattern of your thought process, the way you have moved in your inner being, the very nature that's driven you and the motive behind it has literally brought you to the crucifixion event. So it'd be hard for any of us here tonight to say, well, I've never done that. Because the truth of it is you have. And of course the Scripture verifies that because you've been filled with that attitude and that nature. In our previous, I guess it was last Saturday night, we looked at the contrast that is going on. And you remember that in chapter 12, verse 1 down through verse 8, you have one story given to us. And then in verse 9 down through verse 14, you have this second story. And they are so similar, just taking place in different places. And that what's going on in the grain field, which is the first story, is going on in the synagogue, which is the second story. So what you are out there is what you are in here, and what you are in here is what you are out there. Hey, nothing has changed. So the fact that you're in a building marked the church doesn't really change anything. It isn't anything sacred, more sacred here than is sacred out there. Because what drives you out there drives you in here, and there is an amazing contrast. The Pharisees, the way they were in the grain field, when the disciples were picking grain on the Sabbath day, and they were criticizing and saying in verse 2, look, your disciples are doing what is not lawful to do on the Sabbath. What was going on in that hour out there in the grain field now is going on in the church in verse 9. They've come into their synagogue, and now they're pointing the finger saying, you're going to heal a man with a withered hand on the Sabbath day. And they did that they might accuse Him. And the contrast was basically threefold. The contrast was basically the attitude, which is really the nature of the individual himself. See, your attitude and your nature are all intertwined together. What you are inside literally begins to spill through you and expresses itself. And what you are inside is the attitude of your very being, the way you approach things. Maybe it's time for an attitude check. What is your nature like? And obviously, on the one hand, we saw that the Pharisees had the attitude of accusation. And, oh, I forgot to bring those. I'm so sorry. I had these finger stretchers I was going to bring tonight. Because they like that long finger. They just love that long. The longer the finger, the better. Because it's an attitude of accusation. It's an attitude of always, I know you're going to find something wrong with me. I can just sense it. Why? Because you got that long finger. I can just tell you're going to, hey, before I get done, I'm going to mess up. Why? Because, hey, you're going to criticize. I know you are. I know you are, because it's the attitude. See, the disciples couldn't be right because someplace, somewhere, the Pharisees were going to nail them. It was their attitude. In fact, when you go down into the temple scene, you see the same attitude and the same nature, that they might accuse him. See, their whole perspective is from, how can we accuse him? We're going to find something. And that's their attitude and their nature. They live in that nature. Oh, so sad. What's the nature of Jesus? The nature of Jesus is openness. The nature of Jesus is contrasted from that. The nature of Jesus is, oh, how can I help? The nature of Jesus is, oh, how can I save the day? The nature of Jesus is, as he told it in parables, was wedding feast and parties and joy and happiness and, oh, a withered hand of a man has been healed. Wow, isn't this phenomenal? His family's rejoicing. We've saved the day. Yay! And the Pharisee, oh. You can see the difference in that, can't you? Contrast. Now, the attitude always spills into action, you know, because the nature is what drives your activities. So if you say, well, I'm not sure what my nature and my attitude is, look at your actions, because it will spill through your actions. You cannot help it. A guy has an armful of books and he's walking down an aisle, and I'm sitting there. What is it in me that just wants to stick out my foot? Whatever that is, that's my nature. That's my nature. It has to spill into action. I can't help myself. I just want to. Oh. Now, you can control the actions to a degree. I understand that. But sometime, someplace, you will respond. Your nature will show up. Sometime, someplace. I know you can grit your teeth part of the time. You can, some of the time, but sometime, someplace, we'll be there and we'll see it. Because it'll spill into your action. And if you want to change your action, ultimately, you only got one chance, and that is to change the attitude nature. So we keep talking to you about, you got to change inside, people. Is there a Jesus who died so you could be different inside? Is there a Jesus who wants to change the very nature of your system? Is this more than just a little correction? Stop that. Is this more than just a Band-Aid on cancer? Is this more than that? Is this a radical internal alteration in the very core of my being until I'm not who I was? Because Jesus has altered me in the depth of my life. Whew. Man, oh man. And the contrast is in the actions. In the actions, of course, the accusation is that they will not allow a man with a withered hand to be healed. And in this passage, but hey, Jesus, he's going to heal the man. And in the story he tells, hey, their action is they would save a sheep that got into the pit, but they wouldn't save a man who got in a pit. See, their attitude spilled into their action, their nature. And it's true with Jesus. He would save a sheep. Sure he would. Oh, but he'd save a man too. In fact, he'd do that beyond. Story after story that he told, Good Samaritan, other stories verified it. The third contrast was the idea of the acknowledgement. That is, what they focused on. And of course, what you focus on is determined by your nature. And the acknowledgement, of course, is in the Pharisee is the law. See, their big deal is the law. The law says. And it's so intriguing because the laws were the stuff they made up. We're not even talking about the laws of God. We're talking about the stuff they made up. Yes, the law of God is there, but then they made application from that law. And the application got so much bigger than the law of God that they forgot about the law of God and just dwelled in their application. Mercy. So we get so wrapped up in our application of how and what we think, and, well, this is the way I've been taught. And see, that becomes our focus, which, get the finger out. Oh. And Jesus was just the opposite, because you know what he focused on? You know what his acknowledgement was? Oh, the heart of the Father. See, he was being pulled into intimate relationship, and in that intimate relationship, he was just beating with the heart of the Father. And the more you know about the heart of the Father, and the more you know about how he thinks, the more that spills into your actions, because it determines your nature. Oh, would you please get intimate with the Father? Please, would you just get intimate with Jesus? Please, would you just fall in love with Jesus? Please, would you just get saturated with Jesus? Please, would you just let who he is just permeate the very depth of your being? Please, please fall in love with Jesus. Now, that brings us to, and I want to walk you through verse 14. That brings us to verse 14. And what I discovered, and this was interesting to me, what I just gave you was overall contrast in the passage, in the larger focus of the passage. But when you come into verse 14, you find out that there is another contrast in verse 14. For instance, he starts the passage out in verse 14 with then. It's the Greek word de, D-E, which is the major translation, the most often translation of that word is the conjunction but, which is a contrast. So you got verse 13, then Jesus said to the man, stretch out your hand, and he stretched it out. It was restored as whole as the other, but. So you got a contrast going on again. And I want to propose to you in verse 14 that what he's doing is he's walking us through, and don't get wrapped up in words, but what he's doing is he's walking us through the same basic contrast that I just walked you through, attitude, actions, acknowledgement. He's doing the same identical thing in verse 14, just rehashing the whole thing all over again, only giving it more detail. And I want to walk you through that tonight. Then the Pharisees, verse 14, then the Pharisees went out and plotted against him, how they might destroy him. Look at the contrast of the attitude. Interesting. One of the main verbs is went out. See it there? Then the Pharisees went out. Really got intrigued with that word. Ekcheromai is the Greek word. And it's interesting that in the Greek text, it's the first word in the text. And we've told you this before, and so you already know it, that he front-loaded, in the Greek language, they front-load the sentence with what's most important. So obviously the most important thing in the passage is that they went out, that he's emphasizing that. And it's, of course, the Pharisees who went out. And this word is really a strong word. Strong word. For instance, it's used in relationship with the resurrection. It's used in relationship with disease. And every time it's used, it has the idea of escaping. In other words, in the resurrection scene, it uses this word, and it has the idea of death has literally reached out and grabbed a hold of an individual. They are enveloped with death. They are contained in death. Death is a trap that's literally reached out and confined them, and they have escaped out of the jaws of death. That's this word. So it has this idea of escaping and being liberated from. Same thing with disease. Disease becomes this trap. It's just literally encompassed my body, and it's just literally enveloped my very being, and I'm just drugged down with this terrible disease. But whoa, I've been healed, which means what? I've escaped the disease. I've been turned loose. The door has been kicked open, and I made my way out, and I've escaped. Now that's interesting because that's the word that's used here. The Pharisees escaped. So the whole idea here is not just, well, hey, they went out, not just they changed locations. That, of course, is involved, no question about that. But what's going on in the passage is that they've literally escaped, which means, Oh, you got to get this, which means that Jesus and what he's been doing. See, they've been with him in the grain field in chapter 12, verse 1 through 8. They've been with him in the grain field, and there was an amazing confrontation there. And Jesus gave them truth and preached three great ideas, gave them three great stories in verse 3, 5, and 7. Gave them these three great stories. No question about that. So they were encompassed with truth. He surrounded them with truth. He laid the scriptures on them, took them back to their own Old Testament, literally laid it upon them, and they were encompassed with this amazing truth that he gave them out of the scriptures. Now they've come into the synagogue, and he is again taken this idea, told a story, sheep in the pit, man, and laid truth, logical, reasonable truth, laid truth all around them. So these Pharisees are literally trapped, literally encompassed, literally overwhelmed, literally encased with truth, and they find themselves saying, let's get out of here. Where's an open door? How can I get out of the truth, man? I got to escape this thing. Woo! Isn't that amazing? Truth was all around them, and they wanted to escape. Their main idea was, how can we get out of here? How can we eliminate this? And they were escaping the truth. It's interesting when Jesus confronted demons. The same kind of attitude, while this word may not be used, as you march through the book of Matthew, the same feel, you get the same feel about demons. In other words, Jesus literally confronts demons, and you get the feeling these demons are saying, oh, how can we get away from this? How can we get out of here? For instance, in Matthew chapter 4, verse 11, there's the temptation of Jesus, and he goes through this 40-day fasting thing and 40 days of temptation with the devil and doing spiritual warfare, and comes up to these three last temptations where the devil tries to get him. And finally, when the last one is over, the devil doesn't say, well, hey, let's take a break, I'll come back later. It isn't that kind of a thing. The devil left him, it says. But the idea of left there is much bigger than that. It's the idea that, oh, I got to get out of here. That the devil has had it up to his eyeballs and was saying, oh, I'm sick of this. I'm running out of here. And was escaping. The demons were that way. For instance, in Matthew chapter 8, we're just going through a few of them, but Matthew chapter 8, verse 31, you get the same idea that they came into the land of the Gergesenes, and there was two demon-possessed men, and they were filled with demons. And in the confrontation, the demon said, we got to get out of here, but you can't send us to hell, Jesus. It isn't time, so you got to put us someplace. We got to get out of here. We can't stand to be around. How about the pigs? Please let us go into pigs. So a herd of 2,000 pigs was filled with demons, because they couldn't stand to hang around Jesus. We've got to escape. We've got to escape. You find the same thing going on in Matthew chapter 17, verse 18. They've come down from the Mount of Transfiguration, and the disciples had tried to cast this demon out of this little boy and couldn't get it done, this teenager, and one teenager and one wimpy demon, and they couldn't handle it. Jesus moved in, and the demon he couldn't tolerate it. The demon was rebuked, and it came out. He escaped out of him. Whoa. Now these Pharisees, remember, they are of their father, the devil himself. And in the confrontation with Jesus, they've literally been enveloped with this truth. The truth of who Jesus is has literally enveloped them and literally encased them. And they've literally found themselves within the perimeters of truth. And they're looking at one another saying, we got to get out of here. Let's escape. I'm looking you over to see if you have any identification with that at all. How many times have you run away? I really was intrigued with this. I wanted to see what you'd think of this. The rich young ruler scene. You remember it. This young man comes running. He's rich, so he's got everything he wants. He's young, kind of like me. And he's a ruler, which means he has power and authority and position. So he's a neat guy, man. Every young lady wants him. So here's this rich young ruler. He comes running to Jesus saying, something's lacking in my life. But you got wealth. I know, but something's missing in my life. But you got position. I know, but fulfillment of life through position. I know, but something's missing in my life. And you're young. Everything's before you. I know, but something's missing in my life. What could it be? What one thing do I lack? And Jesus talked to him about the commandments, the law thing. Oh, I've done all that. See, I got all that down. So I've been doing all the right things. Well, that's good. But that hasn't satisfied you? No, hasn't. Still lack this. Something's lacking. Could you tell me what it is? What one last thing should I pull off to really move in? What? Jesus turned to him and said, hey, you love your money too much. So my advice would be sell everything you got, give it to the poor, and dump that. Get rid of that which is priority in your life, and make me your priority. And the scripture says that when that was said to him, this is Matthew 19:22, and when the young man heard that saying, he went away sorrowful, for he had great possessions. Now I want you to look at the Greek word for went away. See, the word we're dealing with in our passage, I know this is a little technical, but hey, you're smart people. You can get this. Come on, think. In our passage, which is chapter 12, verse 14, see, the Greek word is ek charomai. Here in the rich young ruler, it's apo charomai. It's just a different prefix. Do you see that? In other words, it's the same identical root word, but the prefix is different. One is ek, one is apo. Now, if you were here Thursday night, we again went over this ek and apo thing, because it's a basic preposition in the New Testament, which means from. So it's a change of location. So both ek, ek, and apo, apo, both of those words are translated from. It means you were in this spot, now you're over there. But see, let me remind you, the difference between ek and apo, while both of them mean changing locations, you came from that location to another location. From, both of them are translated that way. They have a distinction about them that's very significant. Ek is different than apo in the origin from which is the spot from where you come. In other words, you've come from this spot to that spot, but apo means it was a place that was nearby the original source. Ek means it's a place inside the original source. And again, I gave you Thursday night my favorite illustration. The boy picked up a stone and threw it at me. The rock came from the boy. That's apo. Why? Because the rock was right down by his foot. And he just reached down and picked it up and threw it at me. So it was apo. It was outside. It was right down. It was nearby. It was right. But if it was ek, it would be from inside him. This was not a kidney stone. This is, he reached up and wham. So ek is inside, apo is nearby. Isn't it interesting that when the rich young ruler was confronted by Jesus, it's apo. In other words, the truth confronted him from the outside. And Jesus confronted him with the truth, and he went away. But the Pharisees, it's a different deal. The Pharisees, he's encompassed them. The Pharisees, he's surrounded them. The Pharisees, he's overwhelmed them. The Pharisees, he's literally taken the truth of God, and he's just heaped it upon them. And they are literally in the middle of truth, and they are saying, how can we get out of here? What a great occasion this is. I get to talk to you about prevenient grace again. See, you are encompassed by truth. You're not just confronted by truth, you are encompassed by truth. You are literally overwhelmed and saturated and involved. It's pressing you. It's not just confronting you tonight. It's literally surrounding you, engulfing you. Jesus, who is the truth, through prevenient grace. Remember, prevenient grace means the grace that goes before. You say, I'm not even a Christian. That's right. It doesn't matter whether you're a Christian or not a Christian. I'm telling you, you are encompassed by the truth, because the overwhelmingness of Jesus has literally come and literally surrounded you, wrapped his arm around you, hounds you, overwhelms you, overshadows you. He's like the light that's all around you. He's pressing in upon you. He is after you. And the only way you can get away from Jesus you have to say, how can I escape? You can run, but you cannot hide. Woo! Truth is after you. I won't go to church. Immaterial. Better not lay down in your bed because he's in your bed. Better not go into the closet. He's all over you in there. Don't go down to the bar. He's there too. David even says, oh, good night. I go to hell. And guess what? He's there too. How can I escape? How can I escape? That's this Jesus of ours. Oh, preacher, how could you escape? You can't. So why don't you be like Jesus in the passage, which is the contrast? See, the Pharisees are trying to run away. Get me out of this. Oh! Why don't you be like Jesus and say, oh, Father, I'm here, and embrace the truth? Well, that'll change my life. Wouldn't that be good? Unless you just like misery. I mean, if you're just stuck on it, keep fighting. But wouldn't it be something? See, that's the scene. See, this is the scene of a guy with a withered hand, and there's going to be healing, and there's going to be joy, and there's the family's going to gather in, and there's going to be a party, and we're going to go home and say, woo, isn't this great? And the neighborhood's going to be happy, and the guy's going to get a job, and everything's going to be over. Against the Pharisees are running out saying, how are we going to kill him? Well, I want to respond. I want to respond. I want to respond. Now, this contrast of the attitude, which is the nature thing, spills into the actions, which is in the passage. Look at verse 14 again. Then the Pharisees went out. See, it's an escape thing. Let's get out of here. Well, contrasted with that is Jesus, who is embracing and saying, okay, hey, do in me whatever needs to be done. Change me in every way that needs to be changed. Now, the second is the actions. Went out and plotted against him. Plotted against him. Do you see it? Plotted against him. Now, the Greek word for plotted there is zumbolio. Boulion. Zumbulion. I'll get it right. Whew, these words. It's the word for counsel. It's the word for counsel. In other words, the plotting idea is the counsel idea. Let me give you the picture of the counsel. You know, it's the big board meeting, the big boardroom, you know. And they got the big table, the big oak table, you know. And they got all the lazy boy recliner chairs around it, you know. And all the big boys come in and sit around the table. It's the council, man. And they all sit there and they all lean over the oak table and they all put their heads together and make plans. That's the council. See, that's what they did. See, they went back to their meeting place and they just stuck their heads all together and said, how are we going to plot? They plotted, they counseled together how they were going, what method they were going to use, how they were going to pull this off. This wasn't the first time they've done that. It won't be the last either. Let me give you another scene. Oh, I love this. They've crucified Jesus. And Then the day after the crucifixion, that was on the on the Sabbath day, and before the Sabbath day started. And then that Sabbath night, which started at 6 p.m. on Friday, crucified him on Friday, 6 p.m. on Saturday, that Friday, Sabbath day started. Went to 6 o'clock the next day, which was Saturday at 6 o'clock. So during the Sabbath day, they got to thinking, you know, those disciples said that in 3 days, he said that in 3 days, I bet those disciples are going to steal that body. They got worried about it. Now, the disciples didn't remember that. They didn't remember that Jesus said in 3 days he'd be raised from the dead. But the Pharisees remembered it. That shows you how they've been encompassed in the truth. So they remember that in 3 days he said he'd raise again. So they got in their head the disciples are going to steal it. Oh, so you know what they did? They broke their Sabbath day law. And they marched all the way to Pilate's palace, which was over a Sabbath day's journey. And when they got there, they went into Pilate's palace, which was breaking their defilement law because you couldn't go into a Gentile house. So this is really important. See, that's how important this was to them. Broke the Sabbath day law, broke their defilement law. They went right into Pilate's palace and said, hey, Pilate, we're afraid that deceiver is going to deceive even in his death. And that the disciples are going to steal that body, and they're going to go around and say he's raised from the dead, and the last deception will be worse than the first deception. What was the first deception? Here's a Messiah who's saying he's going to be raised from the dead. A Messiah walking around doing miracles, saying he's going to... That was a deception, they said. Now, to have a dead man walking around doing miracles, this would really be a deception. So, they say, we got to nail this thing down. So Pilate said, hey, what do you want? We want a seal on the tomb. So they put this Roman seal on the tomb. We want guards posted, and this guard was not just one guard. A guard was at least 4, could be up to 12. I think they got the max. So there's 12 Roman guards. Understand, these are the meanest, the biggest, the worst. These are the special forces of Caesar's army. They are the personal bodyguards of Caesar. You know, I won't explain that to you, but anyhow, that's who they are. So they are not afraid of any. These are veterans, and they're standing in front guarding this dead body that's in this tomb. 12 of them. While they're standing there guarding this dead body, all of a sudden the angel of the Lord comes down, and the earth begins to quake, and these guys pass out from fear. Boom, they're gone. As they're passed out from fear, of course, the stone is rolled away by the angel, and then the ladies come, and finally, these guys wake up. And when they wake up, they say, oh. Now, in that day, if you were guarding a prisoner and he got away, you had to take his place. And if you're guarding a dead body and it gets away, you got a real problem. So they say, oh, we're in trouble. And interesting, they didn't go to their Roman guard, their Roman centurion. They didn't go to him, who would have been over them. They went to Pilate because they knew who was in charge of this thing. Or they went to the Jews, I mean. They didn't go to Pilate. They went to the Jews because they knew. They went to the high priest. They went to the boys who really are pulling the strings on this because they needed some leverage. So can you see them? Here's these Roman guards running into Jerusalem, and they come right up to the high priest and his men and say, oh, oh, oh. And it says they told them everything that happened. So they gave a witness. Isn't it interesting how God gets the truth to you even through a Roman guard? So the witness of the resurrection was given to the high priest. Oh, bright lights, angel came down, we passed out. Body's gone. You know what it says? It says that these Jews, this high priest and these guys, these Jews said, come on guys, let's go to the council room. And this word shows up again. And they counseled. They got around their table and put their heads together and say, what are we going to do about this? Now, you would think that in the talk, at least one of them would say, maybe we ought to consider the possibility that the guy was raised from the dead. They never even brought that up. You know what they decided? We're going to raise some money. Yeah, we'll take some money right out of the treasure. Probably some old lady's widowed Social Security gift to the church. We'll take that money right out of the treasure, and we'll hand it to these soldiers, and you guys go out and tell the lie. Even admitted it was a lie. Spread the lie that the disciples stole the body. But the disciples didn't steal the body. We don't care. Spread the word anyhow. But we were there, and he didn't steal. I know. It was an angel. Don't tell that. We're paying you. And they counseled. They're doing it here. There's another aspect of this word which is really important in the passage. That this word includes the idea of carrying out a decision already made. In other words, they've already made up their mind. They're not going to bend. They're not open to truth. They're not going to bend on this. They've already decided, and all they're doing is getting together, putting their heads together, coming into themselves to decide how we're going to do it. Not what are we going to do, but how are we going to do it. That's contrasted with Jesus. What's Jesus all about? Oh, open to the Father. Okay, God. Hey, Father, what do you want to do? Oh, heal the guy's hand? Okay. Okay with you on the Sabbath? Sure. Have you already made up your mind? See, here's the difference, folks. They came into themselves. See, do you see that picture of the council? They came into themselves. They put their heads together. They came into themselves. See, they came into themselves. Do you realize why you consistently do what you do? Because you come into yourself, and because you are the way you are, you always get the same results. What would happen if you would, whoa. This guy comes to church. Message of God is preached. He's a young man. He's a teenager. God moves upon him, encompasses him with truth. He knows he ought to slip out to the altar, ought to give his life to Christ. He ought to respond in openness to Jesus and let Jesus be intimate with him. And he looks at his life and he turns in and says, oh, and his inside say, oh, not tonight. Not tonight. I'm not going to respond now. I got a lot I want to do. I got a lot of things I want to get into. Hey, I'll do it when I get older. So he doesn't respond because he turns into himself. And instead of going, he turns in. He's just a young man, though. Now he's 30 years of age. He's married, got kids. He's sitting in a service, standing in a service. God moves upon the young man, encompasses him with truth and amazing truth. And as he's moved by the truth of God, he knows he ought to respond. He knows he ought to give his life to Christ. He knows he ought to in openness. But he turns into himself and says, what should I do? What should I do? And you know what his insides say to him? Oh, not tonight. Listen, you're only 30. Listen, you got a lot of plans. Listen, it would change your life too much. Listen, I wouldn't do that right now. Listen, there's too much. No, your wife will think you're saying she's right, so don't do that. So he turns into himself. So he doesn't do anything. But he's young. He's only 30. Now he's 45. Oh, guess what? He's sitting in a service. God encompasses him with truth. Oh, he has this overwhelming urge that says, oh, I ought to respond to Jesus. He turns into himself. He turns into himself and says, what should I do? And you know what his insides say? You know what, when he turns into himself, what it says? His insides say, oh, not tonight. Listen, tonight isn't a good night. No, this isn't the time to do it. Listen, you're only 45. Now he's 55, sitting in the service. Truth comes. He should, but he turns into himself. And you know what his insides say? Oh, no, I wouldn't do it now. You're way too young. You're only 55. Listen, this is not the time. You got plenty of time left. If I were you. Now he's 65. Oh, he's sitting in a service. The truth of God is all over him. And he ought to respond. He knows he should, but he turns into himself. And when he turns into himself, his insides say, oh, Oh, not tonight. No, I wouldn't tonight. After all, you're only 65. You got plenty of time. Now he's 75. Oh, he's sitting in a service. The truth of God is all over him. He knows he ought to respond, but he turns into himself, and it's inside say, oh, not tonight. Listen, you're only 75. You got plenty of time. No, you don't want to do that now. Not tonight. Now he's 85. Oh, he's sitting in a service. The truth of God is all over him, and oh, he knows he ought to respond to God, but he turns into himself. And you know what his insides say? Oh, you're only 85, man. Not tonight. When do you think this through, when do you think he's going to turn into himself and his insides are going to say, oh, this is the night? Never. Never. The only way the guy will ever respond to Jesus is to say, I'm not turning in anymore, man. I'm turning, whoa! Because if you turn into yourself, your pride, the way you've always, they're not putting, they're just trying to, they're not. See what? You gotta. See, that's the Pharisees, man. See, the Pharisees are turning into themselves. And as they turn into themselves, they already have made up their mind. And it isn't going to change, man. The only chance the Pharisees have got is to break with that, which Jesus is the breaking of that. Jesus is. You got to go beyond yourself. If you don't go beyond yourself, you'll always be just like you are. With the same attitude you've got, only you just grow old, man. How am I ever going to change, brother? I've got to, okay. I'm not listening to this. I'm not counseling anymore. Around the table. Turning in. Jesus, are you surrounding us with truth tonight? Woo, are you just encompassing us with yourself? Are you literally absolutely overwhelming us with your very presence? Are you literally coming and pressing us with your call? Are you literally knocking on our heart's door? Are you saying to us, there's something we're missing? Are you saying, oh, you want to make some adjustments in our lives? Are you coming to our lives, literally pressing us with yourself? Are you wooing us and calling us into a love relationship with you? Are you wanting to literally bathe us in your healing? Are you literally wanting to change our minds and infiltrate our thought process? Are you wanting to literally encompass us? And I've discovered it to be true, Jesus. I turn into myself and it tells me, no, not tonight. It'll be easier later, but the truth of it is, Jesus, it's never easier. There will never be an easier, better time than this moment to literally throw my life at your feet and let you do all you want to do. It'll be harder the next time and harder the time after that and harder and harder and harder and harder and harder. Don't let us escape tonight. For the truth of the matter is, our attitude of turning into ourselves, our attitude of the long finger, our attitude of accusation, our nature. No, God, it isn't the alcoholism. No, God, it isn't the drugs. No, God, it isn't the swearing. No, God, it wasn't the adultery. It was the attitude. It was the nature. That's what nailed you. We turned into ourselves. That's what plotted. That's what pulled this off. We already made up our mind. Oh, change my mind tonight and bring me into a total openness. Break down every door until there's a total openness and response to you in every area of my life. What is he talking to you about tonight while we're bowed? Why would you run away? Why would you escape? Nobody hears against you. Don't turn in. Don't. Come on. Come on. In the openness of His presence, let Him bathe you in Himself. In the name of Jesus Christ of Nazareth, I will not run away tonight. In your precious name, go to the depth of my life. I want to kneel here tonight, Jesus. I want you to literally take me. And Lord, break down every wall in my life that I don't even know about, every blind spot. Work it over. I'm burning the oak table. I'm going to go beyond into you. Pull me to your heart. Would you respond to Him tonight? Maybe you can't kneel. You could come and stand. Would you respond to Him tonight? How many times have you been in this same situation where He's talked to you, but you turned inward and said, oh, and you found reasons why not. Oh, how He loves you. You are among friends. Nobody here is against you. We're for you. We're seeking with you. Listen to Him. Listen to Him. Listen to Him. You don't have to be like you are. Listen to Him. Listen to Him. Listen to Him.